I knew the HOA had finally lost their collective minds the second I stepped onto my back porch at 6:58 a.m. and found Karen Voss, president of Willow Creek Estates, standing dead center in my grass with two of her clipboard-carrying disciples, all three of them staring at my lawn like it had personally insulted their bloodlines. No knock, no warning, just Karen in her pastel cardigan and fake pearls clutching my shed permit application like it was a dead rat. Denied, she announced in that syrupy voice she used when she was about to ruin someone's day, the same tone people use right before they kick a puppy. For a shed? I asked, still holding my coffee. For your proposed eyesore, she corrected sweetly, as if my plan to store a rake and a leaky wheelbarrow was a direct threat to the American way of life. They claimed it violated historical sightlines. I live next door to a Domino's that's been there since the Reagan administration. The only historical thing around here is the 2-for-1 coupon stuck to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a slice of pepperoni. That was the moment something inside me snapped clean in two. Clean, loud, and irreversible. If they wouldn't let me build one honest structure on land I'd scraped together for 12 brutal years of overtime and side gigs, then fine. I'd build something they literally couldn't touch. Something below ground. A shed denied. A bunker approved by pure spite and the deepest part of my soul that was done being polite. My name is Ethan Hayes, and up until that morning I was what most people would call a functional adult. Not flashy, not loud, just a widowed IT guy who liked his tools organized, his coffee black, and his mornings quiet enough to pretend the world wasn't constantly trying to nickel and dime him into madness. I'd bought this house after my wife passed, thinking it would be my safe little fortress where chaos stayed on the other side of the fence. Simple lawn, 2-car garage, driveway that cracked in the exact same spots every winter. Nothing fancy. I liked routine. I liked fixing things myself. And I really liked keeping my stuff out of the rain, which is why the shed had mattered. It wasn't some backyard McMansion. It was 4 walls and a roof for the wheelbarrow that leaked rust, the Christmas lights I swore I'd untangle one day, and the single rake that had survived 3 moves and 2 floods. Just basic, honest storage for basic, honest life. But here's the hilarious thing about simple plans. They act like blood in the water for complicated people with too much time and not enough therapy. Every time I so much as thought about improving my own property, Karen materialized like a summoned demon in Lululemon, waving bylaws like holy scripture. They always had opinions. They always had rules. Back then it was merely annoying. Now it felt dangerous, because somewhere between my perfectly reasonable application and Karen showing up at dawn like a budget Terminator in designer flats, the HOA had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. They weren't just nitpicking anymore. They were invading, dictating, trying to tell a grown man what he could and couldn't do on land he'd paid for with blood, sweat, and way too many lonely nights. Karen Voss had always entered spaces like she'd rehearsed the moment in front of a mirror for hours. Chin tilted at a precise 45-degree angle of superiority, cardigan draped just so, smile so tight it could cut glass. She treated her HOA title like it came with a crown and a scepter. So when she strutted up my driveway waving that beige envelope with the smug confidence of a judge about to sentence someone to community service for breathing wrong, I already knew I wasn't going to like whatever came out of her mouth. She didn't even wait for me to speak. "Ethan, darling," she cooed, drawing my name out like I was a naughty toddler. "Your permit request has been processed." Processed. Not approved. Not reviewed. Processed. Her favorite word when something was already dead. I opened the envelope and the word denied hit me like a slap across the face, stamped in big red bureaucratic glory. Underneath, the reason, non-compliance with historical sightlines and community character preservation. I looked up slowly. Historical sightlines, Karen? There's a Domino's sign blinking 24/7 right over my fence. She folded her arms, pearls bouncing with indignation. Community character must be protected at all costs, Ethan. We simply cannot allow visual pollution. I gestured behind her. Mrs. Delgado 3 doors down has a 10-foot inflatable Easter bunny that's been up since last April. You approve that? Karen sniffed, the kind of sniff that somehow managed to convey both superiority and seasonal allergies at once. That was before my tenure. We are restoring standards. Standards. The word tasted like expired milk. Her cousin had a boat trailer parked in his front yard for 3 years, rusting gloriously, but apparently that met Guideline 14B subsection whatever. The rules only applied when Karen decided they should. That was the first real spark in my chest, the one that didn't fade into a sigh like all the other times the HOA had pulled their nonsense. This time it felt personal. Targeted. Wrong. She tapped the denial paper. Any attempt to build will result in immediate fines and possible liens. We expect full compliance. Then she turned on her heel like she was dismissing a peasant from court. The gate clicked shut behind her with the finality of a prison door. I stared at the crumpled letter in my fist until the paper tore. For the first time in years, I thought, fine. If you want a war, Karen, you're going to get one you'll never forget. I spent the rest of that morning staring at the denial letter on my kitchen counter like it was daring me to accept defeat. I'm not a dramatic man, but Karen's syrupy tone kept looping in my head. Historical sightlines, community character, standards, until they stopped sounding like rules and started sounding like excuses designed specifically to screw me over. So I did what any slightly unhinged, coffee-fueled homeowner would do. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through the HOA bylaws like a man mining for gold in a landfill. Zoning documents aren't exactly beach reading. They read like they were written by a committee of angry accountants on a 3-day bender. But the deeper I went, the more something smelled rotten. Sections contradicted each other. Pages looked scanned crooked or edited by someone who thought highlight tool was optional. One subsection referenced an amendment from 2009 that simply didn't exist in the archive. Another quoted wording from a 2015 revision that had vanished into the digital ether. And the signatures. Oh, the signatures were comedy gold. The treasurer's signature stayed identical for 12 straight years, loops and slants perfect like a font. Either she had the steadiest hand in suburbia, or someone had been copy-pasting like their job depended on it. I printed the juiciest pages and stepped outside for air. That's when my neighbor Bob leaned over the fence with his usual glass of orange juice at noon. "Researching your executioner?" he asked with a grin. I held up the papers, trying to figure out why I can't store a rake. Bob snorted so hard, he almost spilled his drink. "Easy. Karen hates when anyone else improves their property. Makes her feel small. She once fined me for a mailbox that was the exact same model as hers. Same color, same everything. Told her to come remove it herself. She backed off faster than a cat from a bath. I raised an eyebrow. She seemed pretty comfortable invading my yard this morning." Bob leaned closer, voice dropping. "That woman's been on a power trip since the day she moved in. Tried to rewrite the holiday decoration policy because she didn't like seeing my lights from her window. She's weird, Ethan. Petty and weird. Half the board doesn't even show up to meetings anymore. They just rubber stamp whatever Queen Karen slides in front of them." I looked at the pages in my hand with new eyes. If Bob was right, the HOA wasn't just sloppy, it was operating on expired, possibly forged rules that nobody had bothered to question in over a decade. He warned me the last guy who pushed back ended up with weekly inspections. Grass too tall by a 1/4 inch. Hose left out overnight. They'd invent violations just to wear you down. I thought he was exaggerating until the next morning proved him right. A yellow notice taped crookedly to my door, lawn edging inconsistent with community standards. The day after that, improper storage of outdoor equipment. My rake was leaning peacefully against the garage. Then came the real gem, a letter threatening a fine for excessive reflective glare from my perfectly normal windows. It felt like harassment wrapped in pastel bureaucracy. And just when I thought it couldn't get more absurd, I caught them. 2 board members creeping along my property line with cameras, one actually kneeling to photograph my sprinkler head, the same model every house on the street had. When I stepped outside, they pretended to be admiring the clouds. "Routine compliance check," one muttered, not meeting my eyes. That was the moment it fully clicked. This wasn't about safety or aesthetics. This was surveillance. My shed wasn't a project anymore. It was a hill I was willing to die on, or rather, dig under. That night, I sat surrounded by documents and cold coffee, staring at one line I'd almost missed. Restrictions apply solely to constructed auxiliary units erected above grade level. Above grade level. The words glowed like neon. If I couldn't build above ground, I'd go below. Karen and her little empire had just handed me the shovel. The first time they accused me of suspicious soil disruption, I genuinely thought it was a prank. The notice was printed on the HOA's usual off-brand beige paper, taped crookedly to my door, and signed by Karen in handwriting so sharp it looked personally offended. It claimed my backyard showed disturbances inconsistent with standard landscaping activities. I stared at the paper, then at my perfectly flat, untouched yard. They were inventing problems now. I walked outside just in time to see Karen pacing my property line with 2 volunteers trailing her like ducklings. She had a clipboard pressed to her chest like body armor. "What suspicious soil?" I asked, walking straight toward her. Karen didn't even turn fully. "We received a report," she said, sniffing the air like she could smell rebellion, "that you were engaging in early phases of unapproved construction." "A report from who?" "Anonymous," she answered, which in HOA speak meant Karen wrote it herself at 2 a.m. while stress-eating kale chips. I gestured around. "There's nothing here." She crouched dramatically and poked the ground with a pen. "Soil seems softer than usual." I blinked. "It rained last night." "Yes," she said, making exaggerated notes, "but only on your yard, apparently." I opened my mouth, but she lifted a manicured hand. "We will be monitoring the situation closely." Then she flounced off like she'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address. That was only the beginning. The flood came next. Over the following week, I got a noise complaint for mechanical whirring during hours I wasn't even home, a sanitation violation for early bin placement when my trash hadn't gone out yet, and a citation for lawn aggression, a term I still don't understand unless grass can commit felonies. Every notice carried the same tone: guilty until proven exhausted. Bob came over shaking his head. "They're trying to bury you before you even touch a shovel." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. Good. They're motivating me. It was time. If I was really going to outmaneuver them using their own broken rules, I needed help, the kind you don't find on Yelp. I searched the internet's sketchiest corners until I found him. Big Mike, owner of Subterranean Solutions, no questions asked. His truck smelled like diesel and poor life choices, but when he stepped into my backyard, he took one look and grunted, "Good soil. Cooperative. We can go deep." "How deep are we talking?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends how mad you are." "Pretty mad." Mike nodded like he spoke fluent spite. "I'll bring the excavator." The moment digging began, even the test hole, Karen's HOA bat signal must have lit up. She appeared faster than a raccoon hearing an open trash can, storming through the side gate with papers flapping. "This is a legal excavation," she shrieked. I smiled calmly. "It's subsurface conditioning. Your bylaws only regulate structures above grade level. Soil doesn't count." Karen's face turned a shade of pink usually reserved for emergency room visits. "We will pursue legal action." "Please do," I said. "I'm documenting everything." When she finally stormed off, Mike turned to me. "You sure you want this fight?" I looked at the growing crater and felt something click into place. "Yes. Let's dig." The next morning, before the sun had the decency to rise, Mike returned with a machine that looked capable of challenging God. The giant yellow excavator rumbled into my backyard with a metallic groan that rattled windows 3 houses down. It was loud, unapologetic, and completely illegal in Karen's universe. Perfect. Mike climbed into the cab, cracked his knuckles, and was about to lower the bucket when a scream ripped through the air. "Stop right there." Karen burst through the gate like a villain in a community theater production, 2 volunteers huffing behind her, clutching binders like riot shields. "You cannot begin unapproved excavation." Mike didn't even look up. "You the boss of this neighborhood?" Karen puffed up. "Yes." "Then no," Mike said flatly. "My boss pays cash." Karen spun on me. "This violates Ordinance 12C subsection 9. I pulled out the printed bylaws. No mention of subsurface. Only above-grade structures. One volunteer whispered, "He technically has a point." Karen elbowed him so hard he stumbled. "This is an act of defiance." I shrugged. "Call it property maintenance." Mike lowered the bucket with dramatic slowness. The scrape of metal on earth sounded like freedom. Karen actually shrieked, a high-pitched sound that probably registered on dog whistles 3 blocks away. "Stop the machine." Mike killed the engine and leaned out. "Lady, if you're going to throw a tantrum, can you do it somewhere else? Machines don't like drama." Karen rounded on me again, voice cracking. There will be legal consequences. I gave her the calmest smile I owned. I'm happy to talk to the county. Unlike the HOA, they actually read their own rules. For a second, she looked like she might explode right there on my lawn. Then she spun and marched off, muttering threats about lawyers and emergency meetings. The volunteers scurried after her like frightened ducklings. Mike climbed down. You sure? I nodded. I'm done playing defense. He grinned. Then we dig. And dig we did. Every scoop of dirt felt like payback. Every foot deeper was a middle finger to every petty fine and condescending sniff Karen had ever aimed at me. By the time the first serious crater formed, neighbors were slowing their cars to stare. Whispers spread faster than Karen's newsletters. But I stayed quiet. I documented everything. I smiled politely when Karen taped another violation to my door. Because I knew something she didn't. The deeper we went, the closer I got to burying her entire empire. By the time the emergency HOA meeting was announced, the whole neighborhood was buzzing like someone had kicked a hornet's nest made of gossip and cheap wine. People whispered on sidewalks, peeked through blinds, texted in group chats like it was the Super Bowl of suburban drama. You'd think I'd detonated a nuke instead of hiring a guy to move some dirt. The meeting was set for Thursday evening at the community clubhouse, the same room that hosted potlucks and awkward divorce parties. I arrived early, binder under my arm like a loaded weapon. The parking lot was packed. Inside, every seat was taken and people lined the walls. Karen stood at the front in her best, I'm about to deliver divine judgment, outfit, hair sprayed into submission, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The second she saw me, she smirked. Our guest of honor, she announced into the microphone, voice dripping honey and venom. A few heads turned. Some neighbors looked worried. Some looked thrilled. I took a seat in the second row, close enough to watch her sweat. Karen cleared her throat theatrically and clicked on a slideshow titled Community Threat Assessment. My backyard filled the screen in blurry, zoomed-in glory. This homeowner, she began, pacing like a prosecutor on Law and Order, has engaged in prohibited actions that compromise our safety, aesthetics, and legal stability. A few gasps. A few snorts, mostly from Bob, who had brought actual popcorn. Karen clicked to the next slide, a photo of Mike and the excavator. And this individual has been operating heavy machinery on HOA property. Someone in the back muttered, "That's Ethan's yard, Karen." She ignored it and launched into her greatest hits. Unapproved construction, unauthorized excavation, disruption of community harmony. She even threw in potential sinkholes, like my bunker was going to swallow the neighborhood whole. The room shifted uncomfortably. Then she dropped the hammer. We must vote for an immediate cease and fill order. The air got thick. Karen gestured at me with all the condescension of a principal calling a student to the office. The homeowner may speak. I stood slowly, binder in hand. The room went quiet. I walked to the front, past Karen, who stepped aside with exaggerated politeness, and placed my binder on the podium. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I lifted the first document. This is the HOA's 2009 bylaw certification, the last one ever filed. Nothing since. A ripple went through the crowd. This zoning amendment you keep citing? Repealed in 2012. Murmurs grew. I held up the page with the thick blacked-out section. And this? Illegal redaction in a governing document. Karen stepped forward. That is irrelevant. I raised one hand. You had your turn. Now it's mine. The collective "oh" from the room was sweeter than revenge itself. I flipped to the killer line and read it slowly. Restrictions apply solely to structures erected above grade level. Dead silence. Then someone whispered, "That means he can dig." Karen's face contorted. This is out of context. But the room had already turned. Questions flew. Why weren't the bylaws updated? Why was Ethan targeted when others got sheds? Why redact documents unless you're hiding something? Karen tried to recover, voice rising into hysteria. This is a witch hunt. Bob yelled from the back. Nope. This is a you hunt. Laughter exploded. Karen's meltdown was glorious. Pearls bouncing, hands flailing. The mask of polite concern finally shattered into full Karen glory. One board member actually tugged her sleeve, begging her to sit down. She jerked away. I will not be questioned by ignorant homeowners. The room went ice cold. Someone whispered loudly. Wow, she finally said what she really thinks of us. The meeting ended in chaos. No vote. No cease order. Just a shaken board postponing everything pending review. I walked out quietly while Karen stood alone at the front, clipboard trembling in her hands. The county hearing 2 weeks later was the real funeral. In the sterile municipal building that smelled like old paper and broken dreams, Karen sat pale and twitching while I laid out every piece of evidence. My lawyer, a wonderfully shady guy named Vinny who worked out of a strip mall office between a vape shop and a nail salon, dismantled her authority line by line. Outdated bylaws. Repealed codes. Illegal redactions. No jurisdiction over anything below ground. The zoning officer looked at Karen like she was something stuck to his shoe. Your enforcement actions were entirely without legal basis. When the final ruling came, my bunker fully legal, HOA enforcement suspended, Karen's board stripped of power pending investigation. She actually stood up and screamed, "This is an abomination." The chairwoman didn't even blink. "Sit down, MS. Voss, or you'll be removed." She sat. Hard. And just like that, it was over. The bunker took 6 more weeks to finish. 2 levels of reinforced concrete, emergency lighting, a tiny gaming corner, and 1 ridiculous humidity-controlled room dedicated entirely to a single spotlighted rake. When the final county inspector stamped it approved, he muttered, "This is nicer than my apartment." Neighbors started asking questions they should have asked years ago. Within a month, Karen was quietly removed. Stress and family obligations, the official story said. The new board actually listened to people. Fines dropped. Notices became helpful instead of threatening. The neighborhood exhaled. I sit on my porch most mornings now, coffee in hand, listening to the quiet I earned. 20 feet below my feet sits 2 levels of concrete and spite, a hidden monument to what happens when regular people finally push back. The lawnmower still sits under its tarp exactly where it always has, because I don't need to hide it anymore. The real victory wasn't the bunker. It was the fact that nobody, not Karen, not the HOA, not anyone, could ever tell me where my rake belonged again. So here's the question I leave you with. Was I wrong for going underground just to store a damn rake? Or was Karen Voss the real villain for twisting rules and terrorizing her own neighbors in the name of community character? Tell me in the comments, who was really in the wrong?